So what would a good year make? Today we're going to focus on special teams and defensive backs.
Yes. What do you want to start? Special teams or defensive backs?
Well, I'm going to start with defensive backs, and I'm going to bring up some numbers.
Okay.
Now, of course, not all interceptions are from the secondary, but
sure,
a lot of them are. The last 10 years, these are defensive interceptions since 2014. And in parentheses, the number of those defensive interceptions that happened in games that Nebraska won.
Oh, interesting.
And the reason I bring that up is
to show
the correlation between getting interceptions, getting those kind of takeaways, and winning football games. Now, last 2 years, Nebraska only had 9 interceptions.
Yuck.
But last year, 6 of those 9 happened in games that the Huskers won.
Yeah, and let me use a different word. Is that correlation or is that causation? Were they getting interceptions and it was helping them win football games, versus just happening to come in those games?
Heck, let's go back to Nebraska's last bowl season, which is the high water mark, by the way, in defensive interception takeaways. 16 in 2016, and 14 of those happened in wins.
That says a lot.
2015, 10 picks, 8 happened in wins. And in 2014, 13 picks, 11 happened in wins. All told, there's been 103 total interceptions in the last decade of Nebraska football. 65% of them have occurred in games that the Huskers have won. And as we sadly know, the Huskers haven't won a whole lot of games in the last decade. But 65% of their picks have come in wins.
So where is this leading you to? What's the statement then to come off of this for you?
Well, to define what a good year for the defensive backs would be, get into double digits in interceptions.
We are on the same wavelength because I went a little deeper and I wrote 1 interception per game. Can you average 1 interception?
12.
And last year, if you got to that number where it's 1 per game, you were talking about a top 25-ish defense in terms of total interceptions. Top 25 defense in terms of just raw interceptions. And that was the first thing that I wrote down. I wrote down a couple other things. In particular, no more of those 3rd and 4th down situations where the opposition is picking up first downs. It started in the opener darn near a year ago now to the day when they went up to Minneapolis on the 31st and they struggled and they gave up some back-breaking conversions. So cutting those down. And I did mention one player, John, and it was actually somebody that Matt Rule talked about a little bit today, and that was Bly Hill. Him returning from injury and becoming a contributor, I think, would be a good year for the team. But in particular, the first 2. 1 interception per game, no more 3rd and 4th and long conversions allowed through the year.
Nebraska last year, 3rd down conversions defensive.
Yep.
In wins,
just
26%.
Yep.
In losses,
horrible.
44%.
Horrible. I've looked up those numbers. In wins, if you could do that the whole year, 2nd best 3rd down defense in the entire country, if they could have had that number the whole year. If they were what they were at their losses, it's bottom. It's like 110, 111, somewhere in there. So they were, truly boom or bust. When they won games, it was in large part because they were getting off the field. When they lost games, in large part, it was because they were unable to get off the field. For a defense that was so very good across the board in a lot of metrics, the 3rd down issues was, because in the end, they're a top 50 unit, right? In terms of 3rd down, they were good, but certainly not elite. I would definitely say being a whole lot better in that regard would help.
And I know you can pretty much say this about every position group, but what else would define a good year, especially with the secondary, which has in past years been beset by injuries? To get through one of 2 things: either get through this year healthier than they have been, or have their depth come to the fore. You do have, sounds like Bly Hill is on the mend, could be available at some point relatively soon. You have Sierra Wright, who is out there.
The actor?
Not him. But I think it'd be one of those two things. Either you're getting through this season healthier than normal for a secondary, or your depth has filled in those gaps. I think that would be another sign it has been a good season for the secondary.
Yeah, I think those are good ones.
But especially the turnovers.
Yep.
Double-digit interceptions this year.
Couldn't agree more.
When I see double-digit interceptions.
All right.
For special teams, number one, and this isn't necessarily in any particular order, but number one, Ja'Cory Barney becomes a star.
Ooh, that's fun. I like that.
Ja'Cory Barney becomes a star. They've been talking him up.
Yes.
Been talking him up ever since the spring game. He has one return in the spring game, and Michael's got him on the Jet Awards watch list.
Yeah, seriously.
But in all seriousness, if he becomes a star, Nebraska has not had a star punt returner, strangely enough, since the last time they rolled a true freshman out there.
Mm-hmm.
And DeMornay Pearsonell had an electric year. That's the last time it felt like Nebraska had a real star on special teams from a return standpoint. If Barney becomes a star. And then the other one, and this is, that honestly, if you were to prioritize, to me, this is number one.
Okay.
Finding a kicker you can trust inside 45 yards.
And that'd be nice.
That would define a good year. Because I'll be frank with you. I'm nervous about special teams this year.
Oh, me too.
I am, especially if for a program that is quote unquote chasing three, trying to win one-score games. Your kicker, in order to win those one-score games, you have to make some kicks.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't trust your kicker inside of 45 yards, so to me, those two things would define a good year on special teams. You found a kicker you can trust inside 45 yards, and Ja'Cory Barney becomes a star.
I like those. Along those lines of your last one, I wrote finding and sticking with a kicker and a punter. Sam McEwen last week on the Pick Six pod with him and Evan and Tom Chattel, they did bold predictions, and one of Sam's bold predictions was like harrowing to think about. And that was that Nebraska will play 2 kickers and 2 punters this year, which is just like gross. Finding somebody that they trust, whether it's this weekend or certainly within the next few weeks. What you just mentioned, though, it reminds me of something that actually Sam wrote about today. And he is basically creating his own stat, if you will. He wrote about explosive special teams play. Sam says, a category of my own making that includes all punt and field goal blocks, any stop of a fake punt or field goal, any recovered fumble on a kickoff or punt return of 20 yards, kick returns of 40 yards, net punts of 50 yards, kickoffs covered inside an opponent's 15, and field goals longer than 50 yards. We'll keep track of the opponents too and see what the differential is at the end of the season. Basically, explosiveness. Can Nebraska be explosive with special teams? I gave a couple. I wrote down 2 things that I think would mark being explosive that went away from what Sam said. 2 touchdowns on special teams. Last year they had 1. They had the blocked field goal against Purdue, right?
Mm-hmm.
So 2 touchdowns. I don't care how. 2 touchdowns. And I wrote starting at the 30-yard line or better on average on kickoffs. You get a touchback and you're at the 25. Can they return it and get out past the 30? Can they have fewer than 70 yards to go when they get the football? And so those are the things that for me would mark a very successful and good special teams year for Nebraska.
Average starting field position.
I found a number last year, if I'm understanding this website right, collegefootballdata.com. I think their average starting field position was the 29-yard lines. 29-yard line. But the issue with that is in general. That is all possessions. I'm just thinking of kickoff. So maybe am I being maybe a little too aggressive? Perhaps if their average starting field position was the 29-yard line. Yeah, indeed. They started at the 29 on average. So can you start at the 30? Can you start at the 31? Can you start at the 32? It'd be tough, but I think that would mark a really good year.
I'm looking right now. So last year, and again, this is all field position. This is every time you take possession of the ball.
Yeah.
Nebraska's net starting field position was minus 3.2 yards, meaning that the other team was starting 3 yards ahead of the average that Nebraska was starting at. Now, again, this is all starting field position,
it's
not just after kickoffs.
Yeah. They're one of the worst teams in the country.
108th.
Yeah.
And in offensive starting field position, they were only 95th. Their average drive started inside their own 30-yard line.
Yeah, see, can you change that around?
And by comparison, teams that were near the top of the list, I mean, Michigan won the national championship. Their starting offensive field position was the
34-yard line.
34-yard line.
Yeah, so think about that, right?
Which doesn't sound like a lot when you're talking 34 to the 29, but it is. It's a big difference. Because that's average.
See, that
means
thing.
Every drive is starting an average of 5 yards ahead.
One time.
Each time.
One time. It's only 5 yards. All right, but then multiply that by 100 possessions a year. And that's suddenly 500 yards of field position,
Correct.
when you look at it from that perspective.
Correct.
Yeah, so that's something that I will be keeping an eye on this year.